Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to our Raw Reaction review for Abraham's Boys. Abraham Van Helsing moves his two sons to the United States in an attempt to escape their past. Well, Luke, another day, another member of the Stephen King clan getting an adaptation for the big screen. And yes, we are talking, of course, about Joe Hill's Abraham's Boys. It's been plastered all over it. Maybe some of you don't even know this movie's coming out, but now you do. And we're going to talk about it because we got a chance to check it out. Yes, thanks to the good folks over at IFC and Shudder for sending this over. We got to check out a lot of Shudder stuff this week. We have one with Push coming out on the streaming service this Friday. But this one, if you want to check out Abraham's Boys, you're going to have to do some legwork, get out to that theater, and go see this one, like I said, on the big screen. So I love this release strategy. I think it works so good for us because it's just horror fans getting double the amount of horror like every couple months. It's awesome. And I got to say, going into this one, with it being a Joe Hill property, with it dealing with Abraham Van Helsing, my intrigue was pretty sky high on this one.
I love Joe Hill properties in general. I think he's got a really creative way of writing. I think he is like his father, but different in a way. He approaches things in a unique manner like Stephen King does, but then also kind of modernizes them in a sense and really focuses on the intriguing points. And I think Abraham's Boys is another one of those intriguing avenues you can really go down in terms of storytelling, where it's like everyone has heard of Van Helsing, we know Dracula, all this stuff, but the take here I thought was really interesting. Now, I haven't read the short by Joe Hill, unfortunately. I do want to I'm putting that on my reading list right after seeing this film, and I was excited to see how conceptually they were going to pull this off. I love that it's a period piece. This takes place in 1915, so as soon as I saw that trailer and knew what this was about, because honestly, I never really thought too much about it. And then looking into it, I mean, the trailer says it's Joe Hill, so I instantly went to check it out and see what the concept was. And I was pretty enamored by that trailer.
Yeah, and this is another one, just like with Push. I didn't watch the trailer. I saw the release on Bloody Disgusting, and I saw that, hey, it's hitting in like 2 months. I don't need a trailer. I'm like, I'm in. I like the concept. I like this. Again, if you guys have been following the channel, you know I've gotten on the bandwagon of saying anything Shudder puts out, I will check it out because, again, they've had a really great record the last couple of years. So this one, getting into the film itself, I can say is different than a lot of what they've done recently, I would say, especially because this one's very much a period piece. This is very slow burn. And oddly enough, I know that I've mentioned this movie recently a couple times with you. And I want to know if you had the same feelings as me. I can't help but notice that I think we watched last year's Thine Ears Shall Bleed right like the same time, like about a year ago. So it's one of those things for me where it's like when you're dealing with characters who are out in kind of like the American Old West, you know, just out on the prairies, everything, and you're dealing with kind of this omnipotent force out into the hills, and there's all this tension and everything building up. You don't quite understand what we're dealing with 100%, if it actually is vampires or if it's something else. I thought all of those elements were done beautifully.
Yes, I think this is a really unique film in a sense that when you think horror, I think a lot of people's brains go to a lot of blood and guts and just the gore that we get. And Abraham's Boys is not a really gory film at all. Yes, we're dealing, it's a Dracula tale in a sense, but I think where this film really does excel, and you said this was a slow burn, this is a pretty slow burn type of film, but it is well done in terms of the tension that they bring here in the subject matter that they're going to be tackling, because I think it really does makes you feel for these characters, and you feel like you're part of the story in a sense, because they evoke this looming sense of dread that it's very hard to in a lot of horror films where our go-to is jump scares or just blood and guts. And when you're telling a story that is a slower paced tale and more character based than anything, but you also have this idea of this looming sense of dread of, is something coming for me? And I think that really is something that they perfected through the lens here, because I always feel this level of unease, even when nothing's happening and we're kind of building and building and building. And when you are sitting in these scenes, and sometimes you get this little hint that it's like, maybe the scene's going on for a little bit too long, they drop in that looming dread. And I think it really just pushes the film forward.
Agreed. Yeah, there's a lot of great moments in this that I just found to be both visually striking, but also they really built upon the tension themselves. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that this movie is doing anything that's groundbreaking. It's not being overly impressive, especially when it comes to vampire stuff. It's more vampire adjacent, I would say. Like, there's definitely vampire stuff here, but it's not going to be something like Luke and I were just talking off screen, like a Sinners or, something like that, where it's like, yeah, we're getting the vampires, we're getting everything right out front. This one deals, I think, more in the horrors of kind of your past. And when you bring a family into the world, but you have something, some kind of a force, whether it's, a person, an entity, something that, at some point down the road is probably going to at least rear its ugly head one more time before you kick the bucket. That kind of fear, it can be very tough to live with, and I think they show that very well in Abraham's Boys.
It's one of those things where your past you can't escape, and it is rather haunting. If you're looking for, your basic true blue vampire flick, this is not. You may be left a little underwhelmed here because they're trying to tell a different tale. It's more so using the vampire tale as a backdrop for our characters and what we've been dealing with, and it really is this tightly packed family story. And you start diving into these characters and their relationships and the dynamics, especially when you look at a parent that is, you're all seeing, all knowing, you're a confidant, and then you start second guessing things. And I think those ideas are really played with to perfection here because it does bring that tension. You're not getting those jump scares. You're not getting an overabundance of gore at all. They do implement some scenes of terror that they'll catch you off guard because they're just spruced in there and injected perfectly when they're telling the story, and this more of a slow-paced tale. But they have this understanding of horror and what you need to actually keep the audience engaged in terms of what you're asking from your characters and what they're bringing. And this really does cover all the bases of horror more so, where it isn't just doubling down on your basics. This is more so it's deeper rooted. It is kind of trauma based,
more emotional.
In a sense. Yeah. And you really are leaning on that emotion of these characters.
Agreed. And I think that, like, the thing that I enjoyed the most about this is because, again, even though I loved Nosferatu, one of my only real major critiques of that was, I went in kind of setting myself up, kind of really interested to see what, Robert Eggers might do to change that story up a little bit. And, he didn't really do much. It was more very faithful. And that's kind of where a lot of our Dracula adaptations have been. I'm really becoming a huge fan of these kind of smaller films that are dealing with Dracula. Like, I know this is controversial, but Last Voyage of the Demeter is still a movie I really like. It's just taking a small little section of a story and moving it forward through there. And I agree with you 100%, Luke. That's probably the best way you could put it, is that the real horrors of this movie are watching these two boys who their parents, especially somebody as prolific as Van Helsing, being your dad, and watching them have to come to terms with the fact that dad is just a guy. He is a person, he's a human being, and he is just as scared as we all are. And that's certainly something that I think, once that message is kind of bolstered through the film and it's really put in front of us, I really think that that's when the true horror begins to set in and the family starts to suffer from it as a whole.
I think that's where you start really resonating with the film. I think it took me a second to really find my groove with the film and understand what we were getting, just because I was not familiar with the source material. But when I understood what kind of ideas that they were grappling with and what they really wanted to evoke on screen, in that horror nature, I think they really do it well here. Like I said, it's not your typical horror film. I don't know if this is really ever going to be someone's absolute favorite vampire flick, because it is.
I don't think
it deviates so far from the norm and what we're used to seeing with the tension that we do see in the vampire subgenre. But I think this one is a great character study where you could really understand how to build these characters, especially when you look at source material that is out there already, and then start thinking of, well, how does that affect these characters from a creative standpoint? You could really get some interesting stories out of that, not just centering around the initial story that we've seen a billion times, like you talk about Nosferatu. This is approached more so from an offshoot of a very known tale, and trying to come at it from a different approach and a different avenue. And I think they do excel at that. And it's not just your average vampire flick. They really wanted to get a little more cerebral with this, which I think they do achieve.
Yeah, and I think that's really where my rating comes into play here because although I have a lot of positives with just the tension, the tone, the atmosphere, the direction, I think there's a lot of really beautiful shots here, especially you could tell there's a lot of moving the camera and a lot of tracking shots and things like that. And that's all very competent, very smart stuff. And I think really, I don't necessarily have many issues with the movie. I feel like some of the relationships, there's a few moments of tension that feel a bit forced, especially between the brothers, where it's like there's some back and forth, especially early on, where I'm like, I don't understand why our character is being such an asshole. Like he didn't do it. Like the other kid didn't do anything wrong. Like we're not getting enough information there, and unfortunately, I don't think we ever do. But it's one of those things where it's like, to me, it's like I still found myself really impressed by this movie and enjoying it quite a bit. But as someone, again, who understands really where our audience is going to be lying, I feel like one of the biggest drawbacks is I can only really recommend this movie to probably hardcore Dracula fans of the book, of these characters, of seeing a different take, and just going forward with that. Because again, it's a slow burn. It's not going to like knock your socks off or anything, but it definitely does, on the whole, deliver with what it's setting out to do and telling a more personal, more cerebral horror tale.
Absolutely. That's where this one would probably be hard to recommend to just someone who wants to see a vampire flick. This is something you
Mm-hmm.
almost have to prepare people for what they're going to be watching. Because even me, we see a wide range of things, so even me, I had to really find my groove into this and then understand what we were getting. And then once I came to terms with the story that they were presenting, I was like, okay, I think this is rather well done for the subject matter that they want to tackle. So this isn't your typical vampire flick. It's not going to be for a large group, I don't think. So when we're looking at a rating here, this is slower paced, and the scenes can start to lose you, but I think with the competent acting, and then when they kind of start moving forward with the story, that's where it grabs you back in. But it does teeter at times, and you start feeling that pacing. So for me, I think this is going to be worth a watch. It's something that I can go back and visit every so often. I don't think it's ever going to be one on my main roster of vampire flicks to check out, just because it does deviate pretty heavily from what we normally see. But this is a great kind of film to really understand characters and those emotions, especially when you're dealing with vampiric subject matter, I guess you'd say.
Oh yeah, and I think that for the director here, Natasha Kamari, I mean, I really liked what she had brought visually. I think there is a lot of energy and a lot of focus from her, and I would like to see and maybe follow her career a little bit, especially if she keeps playing in horror, because I think like if she could not necessarily follow up with more of these adjacent to these larger story tales, but like just her sense of, building that kind of unseen dread, and again having the patience, the ability to tell yourself, I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm not going to worry about needing to place in a jump scare every 5 minutes because I'm worried I'm losing the audience. I'm going to trust that my audience is smart enough to enjoy this and follow the story because of our characters. And I got to give her all the props in the world for that, because I think that that's very difficult to do when coming to a vampire movie. But she did it, and for me, it works. It's not going to work for some, but hey, I'm going to sit it worth a watch as well. So I think that's where I'm going to leave my thoughts on Abraham's Boys.
It's definitely a unique film. I think visually, like you said, it has a lot to offer. There's some very beautiful landscapes in here, and there's something where you say, unseen, but there's something where it's like this looming specter, I guess you'd say, that is really well done against the backdrop of certain scenes. It
Because I
really
swear it
does
was
work.
there sometimes, and sometimes it's not. Almost like when they would switch out shots, I felt like, because there's a scene where we're cutting back and forth between someone's vision. I almost could tell you they were switching shots where it's there and not there because they'd had to. It's so good.
Yeah, and I love the way that they play with that, because it makes you tense throughout the film when you're sitting with these characters to understand what they're going through, but then also are feeling the tension that they also feel. So I think in that aspect, it's certainly well done.
100%. But Alrighty, guys, it's going to wrap us up here for Abraham's Boys. Let us know down below if you are sold on this one. Are you going to be checking it out in theaters? Is it playing near you? Are you a big Dracula fan, or are you more into your Dusk Till Dawn, Sinners, Lost Boys type vampires? Because that's the beauty of vampires. There's a little bit of everything for everybody's interest. So that's going to wrap it up here. Until next time, guys, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the horror shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.